The woman at the Route 14 shelter on Dansaman High Street had been standing for 31 minutes when the bus came and went without stopping. It was 8:47 p.m. on a Thursday in late October, and the shelter's side panel had been cracked since February, so the wind came through it sideways and hit the left side of whoever was standing closest to the seam. Adeze Nwosu was standing closest to the seam. She had a black canvas tote bag over her right shoulder that weighed exactly what 2 loaves of bread, a small tin of sardines, and a bottle of groundnut oil weigh when you carry them for 9 blocks, because the bus came and went. She had a blue and white wrapper tied around her waist over a gray work dress, the kind of wrapper women in Accra wear when they want to feel like something is holding them together. The wrapper had belonged to her mother. It smelled, still, very faintly, of the camphor balls her mother kept in the bedroom chest in Enugu for 32 years. She was 47 years old and weighed 49 kilograms. She had lost 4 kilograms since August, which was when the school where she worked as a records administrator had informed her that her position was being reclassified, and that the reclassified version of her position would be offered to someone else at a lower salary. They gave her 3 months of severance pay, which came to 2,340 cedis, which lasted exactly 11 weeks once the rent, the electricity, and her daughter Mimi's school fees for the term were covered. She carried the tote bag and waited for the next Route 14. Her left sandal had a crack running across the strap at the toe. She had sewn it with black thread that morning on the kitchen table before sunrise, sitting under the one light that still worked in that room, pulling the needle slowly the way her grandmother Ifeoma had taught her to sew, with the left hand steady and the right hand moving, never rushing a stitch, because a stitch done in a hurry is a stitch that doesn't hold. There was a man at the far end of the shelter. She had not paid attention to him when she arrived because he had been sitting very still on the low concrete ledge at the back. And still things do not catch the eye the way moving things do. He was somewhere in his 60s, wearing a faded blue agbada that had once been a formal garment and was now a garment that had been slept in more than once. He had no bag. His shoes were plastic slippers. He was holding a small piece of paper against his chest with both hands, pressed flat the way you press something you do not want the wind to take. Adeze looked at him. She did not intend to make a decision. But she looked at him, and the piece of paper pressed against his chest was a bus ticket, and even from the far end of the shelter she could see that it was old. The kind of old that meant it had been carried for days, maybe longer, as a plan that had not been possible yet. He was looking at something far away, and his lips were moving very slightly, the way some people pray when they think no one can see them. She opened the canvas tote. She had 7 cedis and 65 pesewas in her purse, the money she had kept back from the groceries, because the Route 14 from the market to Dansaman cost 2 cedis and 50 pesewas each way, and she always kept bus fares separate in a small zippered pocket inside the purse so that she would never find herself without it. The 7 cedis and 65 pesewas was bus fare for 2 days, and a little margin for tomorrow's bread if the margin did not need to go toward anything else. She took out a 5 cedi note. She looked at it. Then she walked the length of the shelter to where the man was sitting and placed it on the ledge beside him without saying anything, because she understood that there are kinds of giving that require no words, and that words can sometimes make a gift feel like a transaction. He looked at the note. Then he looked up at her. His eyes were very clear for someone sitting alone in the wind at 8:47 p.m. with a pressed flat bus ticket. "You don't have to," he said. "I know," Adeze said. Then the next Route 14 came, and she got on it. She did not think about the 5 cedis on the ride home. She thought about whether Mimi had eaten the rice she left in the pot with a cloth over the top to keep it warm, and whether the electricity had stayed on, and whether she had enough time in the morning to sew the sandal strap again if the thread from this morning had given. She got off the bus at Dansoman Junction and walked the 3 remaining blocks to the compound where she rented the single room she and Mimi shared for the past 14 months, since the 2-bedroom on Pokios Road became something she could no longer afford to justify. Mimi was asleep on the inside mat with a schoolbook open under her chin and the light still on. She was 9 years old, and she slept the way children sleep when they have worn themselves out studying, face down, one arm extended, like a person who has finally given up arguing with the day. Adesi moved the schoolbook, turned off the light, ate 4 spoonfuls of the cold rice standing at the kitchen counter, and went to sleep. She did not know that the man at the bus stop had not been a stranger. His name was Kwadwo Mensah Owusu Boateng. He was 63 years old, and he was the founder and the only remaining active trustee of the Owusu Boateng Education Foundation, a private organization established in 2001 in memory of his late wife, Abena, who had died of a preventable illness at 38 because a hospital in Kumasi had determined that she did not have the means to be treated as a priority. The foundation provided scholarship funding and administrative grants to institutions working in girls' education and community records management across 3 regions of Ghana. It had, in 23 years, put 1,847 children through secondary school and provided employment grants to 46 community organizations. Kwadwo Owusu Boateng had not been riding the Route 14 bus because he could not afford another way home. He had been riding it because his driver of 11 years had died the previous Monday of a sudden cardiac event, and Kwadwo had not yet permitted himself to arrange a replacement. Because Francis Asante had been with him since the foundation's 3rd year, and some griefs require a certain number of ordinary bus rides before they become something you can manage from inside a car again. He had been at the Dansoman area that evening because the foundation's small satellite office on Amamoma Lane was being evaluated for lease renewal, and he had come to look at the building himself, as he always did for decisions of any importance, because he believed that a person who makes decisions without visiting the place the decision concerns is a person who has mistaken information for understanding. The bus ticket in his hand was from that afternoon. He had kept it because Francis used to collect the bus tickets when they rode together anywhere, an old habit from years ago that had no explanation Kwadwo had ever been able to extract from him. And old habits, Kwadwo had found, do not ask permission before continuing. He had watched Adesi at the shelter from the moment she arrived. He had watched because he had spent 23 years learning to watch people in the spaces where they thought no one was paying attention, because that is where you see what a person is actually made of. He had watched her adjust the tote bag when the wind changed. He had watched her notice him. He had watched her open the purse. He had watched the calculation, not whether to give, but whether she could afford to. And then he had watched her give anyway, with no announcement, as though the only question had already been settled internally, and the action was simply the conclusion of a private conversation. He had not gone after her. He had sat with the 5 CD note for a moment, and then he had done what he always did with information that mattered. He had written it down. The piece of paper pressed to his chest had a pen in his agbada pocket. He wrote, "Woman, Route 14, Dansoman, 8:47 p.m., blue and white wrapper, gray dress, black canvas tote, sandal stitched with black thread." He put the note in the pocket where the pen had been and rode the next bus home. The following morning, Adesi woke at 5:14 a.m. and sewed the sandal strap again. The thread from the night before had held, but she sewed it again anyway because her grandmother Ifeoma had taught her that the things worth keeping are worth maintaining even when they are not yet broken. She made tea. She put the last of the milk in Mimi's cup and had hers without. She packed Mimi's school lunch, which was rice with a small portion of the sardines and a boiled egg, wrapped in foil, and placed in the red plastic container Mimi had carried to school every day for 3 years. She walked Mimi to the end of the street where the school bus collected from, stood until the bus was gone, and walked back. She had 4 job applications outstanding. 2 had not responded in more than 3 weeks, which she understood meant they would not respond. 1 had responded with an interview scheduled for the following Tuesday at 10 a.m. for a position as an administrative coordinator with a small engo near Osu. The last was for a records management role at Korle-Bu Teaching Hospital, which she had submitted 14 days ago, and which she had checked her phone for every morning, without allowing herself to think of it as waiting, because she had learned that calling a thing what it is makes the absence of it heavier. She was sitting at the kitchen table with the tea and the phone and the job listings on a recruitment website, making notes in the small brown notebook she kept for job applications, company name, date sent, contact reference, status, when the phone rang. The number was not in her contacts. She answered. The voice on the other end was a woman's voice, clear and businesslike, and it said, "Good morning. May I speak with Adeze Nwosu? This is Constance calling on behalf of the Owusu Boateng Education Foundation." Adeze set the pen down on the brown notebook. "Speaking," she said. "Miss Nwosu, I am calling to inform you that your name has been put forward for consideration for the position of Senior Records and Program Administrator at the Foundation's central office in Cantonments. The role involves overseeing scholarship disbursement records, correspondence with institutional partners, and coordinating reporting for our funding cycles. Mr. Owusu Boateng asked me to call this morning to schedule an initial conversation." Adeze did not say anything for a moment. The tea was still warm in the mug on the table. "How did my name come to be put forward?" she asked. There was a brief pause. "Mr. Owusu Boateng saw your work directly," Constance said, "in the careful way people speak when they have been instructed to say exactly so much and no more. If this story is landing the way I think it is, subscribe before we go further. Because what Adeze discovers when she walks into that office in Cantonments is something neither of them was prepared for." She arrived at the Foundation's Cantonments office the next Monday at 9:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the scheduled meeting, because her grandmother Ifeoma had told her that a person who arrives on time is already behind, and she had carried that instruction since she was 12. The office was in a corner building on a quiet street near the American Embassy, a modest building with clean white walls and a plaque by the door that said Owusu Boateng Education Foundation, Est, 2001. In memory of Abena Owusu Boateng. She stood at the plaque for a moment. 2001, she had been in her 3rd year of secondary school in 2001. Constance, who was a precise woman of about 50 with reading glasses on a chain and a tablet under her arm, met her in the reception area and walked her to a meeting room with a long wooden table and 4 chairs and a window that looked into a courtyard with a single mango tree. There were folders on the table. There was a glass of water and a cup of tea. Kwadwo Owusu Boateng came in 2 minutes later. He was wearing a white kaftan and leather sandals, and he moved through the door with the unhurried quality of someone who has long since stopped needing to prove anything through his arrival. He sat across from her. He looked at her the way he had looked at her at the bus shelter, clearly, without performance. "You don't remember me," he said. "I remember you," Adeze said. He nodded once. Then he opened the folder in front of him and placed a single printed page on the table between them. It was the records from a scholarship application from 2015. The applicant's name was Mimi Nwosu. The application was for a secondary school sponsorship under the Foundation's Community Scholar Program. The application had been submitted by a records administrator on behalf of a community education office in Dansamon, and the administrator's name, in the signature line at the bottom, was Adaise Nwosu. "You submitted this before the deadline closed," Kwadwo said. "The school your daughter was enrolled in had not been informed of the program. You found out on your own. You gathered the documentation yourself. You hand-delivered it to our satellite office on Amamoma Lane the morning before the window closed. Mimi did not receive the scholarship because she was 2 points below the assessment threshold. Adaise knew this. She had never told Mimi. You did not reapply the following year," he said. "She was not below the threshold the following year," Adaise said. "But by then, the position I held had funding to cover her fees for the term. I didn't want to take a scholarship place from someone who needed it more." Kwadwo Owusu Boateng sat with that for a moment. He pressed his hands flat on the table, the way he had pressed the bus ticket flat against his chest. "The position I am offering you," he said, "carries a salary of 4,800 cedis per month, medical coverage for you and your dependent, and a scholarship designation for Mimi through secondary school under our foundation program, which you should have allowed her to receive 9 years ago." He said the last sentence without accusation, which somehow made it heavier. "I want you to understand why I am offering you this," he said. "Not because you gave me 5 cedis at a bus stop. A person's character is not a single act. I'm offering it because I spent 3 days looking at your work history from the records you submitted in 2015, and what I found was someone who had been doing the work of 3 people for 11 years without telling anyone. Every file she submitted was organized beyond what was required. Every correspondence was precise. She referred a family in 2016 to a bursary program she had no obligation to know about, and no personal benefit in flagging. She has been building systems in rooms where no one was watching." He closed the folder. "The Foundation needs that," he said, "and I think you have been waiting for a room where someone would notice it." Adaise looked at the folder. Then she looked at the mango tree in the courtyard through the window. One branch was heavy with fruit that was almost ripe. "A few more days." "When would you need me to start?" she said. "Next Monday," he said, "if that works for you." "That works," she said. She signed the preliminary agreement that Constance produced from the tablet with quiet efficiency. And then Constance showed her the records room, a large, well-lit space with metal shelving units running the length of 2 walls, folders organized by year, a digital filing system that had been inconsistently maintained, and a window that let in afternoon light. Adaise walked the length of it slowly. She ran her hand along one shelf the way you run your hand along a surface when you are figuring out what it needs. "When was this last fully audited?" she asked Constance. 2019, Constance said. Adaise looked at the shelf. "I'll need the digital log for the past 3 years, and a list of which regional offices have their own filing protocols." She said it the way you say something that you've already begun thinking through, that has already become a plan before it was a sentence. She went home that afternoon and picked Mimi up from the school bus at the end of the street. They walked back to the compound together, and Mimi talked about a geography project and a disagreement about a soccer match at recess, with a velocity that required no contribution from Adaise, who walked beside her and listened and watched the sunlight on the street and thought about the records room. At dinner, she told Mimi about the new position. She told her the salary. She told her about the scholarship. Mimi looked up from the plate. "For me?" she said. "For you," Adaise said. Mimi thought about this for a moment with the careful seriousness that children apply to large information when they sense it is large. Then she said, "So you don't have to skip dinner anymore." Adaise had not told her. She looked at her daughter across the small kitchen table. "No," she said, "I don't." She started the following Monday. By the end of the first week, she had completed a preliminary audit of the 2022 and 2023 records, identified 11 scholarship disbursements that had been filed in the wrong program category and could be reallocated to close a funding gap in the current cycle, and drafted a standardized correspondence template for regional offices that reduced the submission error rate to 0 in the first test batch. Constance presented the correspondence template to Quado at the end-of-week review meeting. He read it without speaking. Then he said, "Tell her to put her name on it." She put her name on it. By the end of the second month, the satellite offices in 3 regions were using the new filing protocol. By the end of the third month, a bilateral funding partner that had delayed renewal for 2 years, citing inconsistent reporting from the foundation, had signed a new agreement for 1.2 million cedis over 4 years, following a reporting package that Adaise had assembled, cross-referenced, and submitted with a covering document that took her 4 evenings to write and that the bilateral partner's program officer later described in an email to Quado as the clearest application of records to organizational narrative they had received in a decade of partnership work. Quado forwarded the email to Adaise with a single line, "This is what I meant." On the morning the funding confirmation arrived, Adaise wore the blue and white wrapper over her dress. She tied it the way her mother had tied it, high and neat, and she stood at the kitchen window with the tea she now made with milk, because there was milk, and looked at the street below where a dog was investigating a cardboard box and the vendor on the corner was arranging tomatoes in their stacks, and the light was the pale early light that makes ordinary things look as though they have been considered. She thought about the bus shelter. She thought about the 5 cedis and the calculation she had made, not whether to give, but whether she could afford to. And she thought about how that question and the answer she had given herself had turned out to contain more truth than she had known at the time. She had been able to afford it, not because she had more than enough, but because she had decided that 5 cedis was not the thing that was going to determine what kind of person she was on a Thursday evening in October with the wind coming through the side of the shelter. What was taken from Adaise and Wosu was not easy to take. 11 years of work, of arriving early, of organizing beyond what was required, of flagging bursaries no one asked her to flag, of sewing straps that weren't yet broken. None of it had translated, in the rooms where she spent it, into being seen. That is a particular kind of disappearing. Not violent, just consistent. Rooms where the work was accepted and the worker was not. And yet what that disappearing could not take was the practice itself. The habit of precision. The understanding that a stitch done in a hurry does not hold. The knowledge, stored in 20 years of doing things carefully in rooms where no one was watching, that systems built with attention to the people inside them are the only systems worth building. You cannot audit that out of a person. You cannot reorganize it away. You cannot reclassify it into a lower salary band. It lives in the hands, in the habits, in the way someone walks the length of a records room running their hand along the shelf, already thinking 3 weeks ahead. The world does not always recognize what it is standing in the presence of. It looks at the wrapper and the cracked sandal and the canvas tote, and it sees only what is missing. It does not ask what has been carried, for how long, with what care. It does not consider that the quiet ones, the ones who arrive 15 minutes early because they were taught to, who give without announcement because announcement would diminish the giving, are often the ones who have been building the whole thing from the inside, waiting for the room that could finally hold them. The bus shelter on Dansoman High Street had cracked panels all the way until March of the following year, when the district maintenance office finally sent a team. By then, a Daisy had already moved Mimi and herself to a 2-bedroom apartment 4 streets away, with a kitchen window that caught the morning light, and a spare room she used for the continuing education coursework she had enrolled in through the Foundation's staff development program. She still ties the wrapper when the morning matters. She still sews things before they break. If the woman at that bus stop had kept the 5 settees, nothing in the world would have looked different by the following morning. The bread would still have cost what it cost. The electricity would still have come and gone. But she would have kept it, and something internal, some agreement she had made with herself about what kind of person she was, would have bent slightly, in the way things bend when you decide that circumstance has the final say over character. She decided it did not. That is the whole story. That is also your story, if you have ever stood in the wind somewhere and made that choice and nobody saw you make it. Think about this. If you gave the last of what you had to a stranger who didn't ask for it, not because you had enough, but because you had decided you were the kind of person who does, what would that decision, made in that moment, quietly, with no audience, have been building in you? What has it already built? Leave your answer in the comments. I genuinely want to read it. Subscribe for more stories about hidden strength, quiet power, and the people the world overlooks until they change everything. I'll see you in the next one.